Hello and welcome. You're watching To The Point. Whilst BJP allies are worried that under Modi and Shah the BJP may seek to go it alone, BJP opponents are promising to replicate their successful Bihar strategy. So after the recent by-elections, are there critical lessons for the BJP to both heed and learn? That's the discussion in part 2. But first, with the Director General of the Border Security Force saying that the recent ceasefire violations have been the heaviest since 1971, we ask, what exactly is the message from Pakistan? And with talks between the two countries called off, could the situation deteriorate before it improves? That's the first debate tonight. And now joining me to discuss the spate of ceasefire violations, both on the border as well as the line of control, is India's former High Commissioner to Pakistan, Satyabrat Pal, former Army Commander, Northern Command, Lieutenant General B.S. Jaswal, the former Director General of the Border Security Force, U.K. Bansal, and joining us from Islamabad, former Army General and former Secretary of Defence Production, Lieutenant General Talat Masood. Satyabrat Pal, yesterday the Director General of the Border Security Force, D.K. Pathak, said that the recent prolonged firing both on the line of control and the international border was the heaviest since 1971. As a former High Commissioner to Pakistan, how do you make sense of this? Why is this happening?
It's a bit worrying if it is indeed as heavy as we are told, and we have no reason to disbelieve that, because this sort of pattern in late August, early September is something that we used to see regularly in the mid-1990s, and that presaged two developments. It reflected two Pakistani needs. The first, of course, was simply to get people into the valley before the pass is closed. But more importantly, as a political strategy, it was to give the impression that the border was so live and so dangerous that the Security Council and the General Assembly, which goes into session the third week of September, must take cognizance. So particularly in view of what the current Chief of Army Staff in Pakistan is saying, that a resolution of Kashmir must depend on the UN resolutions, does this mean that the Pakistani army is trying to create facts on the ground, trying to create a scare scenario that will then lead on to Pakistan again trying to agitate things at the UN? That is a worry.
So in a sense, what you're suggesting is this could be a precursor to the UN being asked to step in by Pakistan when the UN session gets underway,
as they tried repeatedly in the 1990s.
General Jaswal, you've just heard the former High Commissioner to Pakistan give us what he believes is a possible political scenario. Let me ask you, as a former Army Commander, Northern Command, what you make. Apparently, there have been 95 ceasefire violations along the LOC and 25 along the international border since the start of this year. There have been 60 since Mr. Modi took over on the 26th of May, 22 of those in August alone. What do you make of this situation from a military standpoint?
Karan, first of all, if you see the figures of last year and this year, ceasefire violations in Northern Command, they've almost remained the same. Whereas towards the international boundary, the ceasefire violations have increased. I would like to delve more on this particular issue because that side is almost status quo. The reason is that we call this as an international boundary and they call it as a working boundary. They call it as a disputed territory. They want to internationalize this boundary and the Kashmir issue. That is the reason this time the provocations have been far more. If you see the statistics of the Northern Command violations up to August, that too is say about 115 or so. This year, last year up to August, we'll go to about 200. So why this shift of gravity toward that side? Second, during the monsoons, a lot of uncut gaps, and they get washed off, and that's an area where they can infiltrate people. That's the reason they're giving covering fire. But what I personally feel is very important is the internal situation in Pakistan itself.
Okay, but can I stop you there,
General? You're well aware of the relationship of the President
Can I stop you for a moment? You said a very important thing. You believe that, in fact, this time the violations that are particularly noteworthy are those happening on the international boundary. Actually, those on the LOC are, in terms of numbers, less than last year, and therefore you tend towards the same interpretation as Mr. Pal, that Pakistan is seeking to internationalize Kashmir, and maybe they will use this as a precursor to raise it at the UN when the assembly session gets underway roughly in about a month's time. In a nutshell, you agree with Mr. Pal, don't you? General Jaswal?
Yeah. I'm trying to highlight some other issues. Sorry, the audio.
I'll come to the other issues later, but first on this point, do you agree with Mr. Pal? Because your whole reasoning supports what he's saying. So do you, on this point, agree with Mr. Pal?
You see, this is one of the issues. There are a conglomeration of issues which need to be analyzed, and then a holistic view taken.
Let me come to the other issues later. General Saab, let's take them one by one. Let's come to the other issues later, otherwise we'll confuse the audience. First, Mr. Masood, let me put this to you, General Saab. You've heard both my speakers in India point out that, in fact, the remarkable and notable violations that are happening are on the international boundary. Those on the LOC are actually in the same proportion and the same number as last year. And they fear that this is a precursor to your internationalizing Kashmir in the UN. After the foreign secretary level talks were called off just about 10 days ago, that might provide Pakistan a further excuse for doing so. Is this what, in fact, the Pakistan army and your government are trying to do?
I think in Pakistan the perception is just the opposite to what I have just heard. In fact, Pakistan thinks that it's the internal dynamics which is making India sort of, make the LOC volatile. So I think it's entirely different in the sense that we think that because of the coming elections and because of BJP's agenda of trying to get rid of Article 370, India is going at any length in order to sort of make sure that the elections in Jammu and Kashmir take place in such a way that they have a majority over there, and for that reason they are stepping up. So, it's like having a completely opposite perception. And then you can also imagine that Pakistan at this moment, when it has such innumerable challenges, internal threat is there, then the IDPs by the millions are there, and they have to be looked after. The political turbulence in Pakistan is at such a stage where things can go anyway, in any direction. So all these combined, you think the military or for that matter the government would in any case try to further destabilize Pakistan and create another situation for itself? I mean, it doesn't make sense at all.
All right, that's a very convincing answer from your standpoint. Mr. Bansal, let me bring you in. You're a former Director General of the Border Security Force. Your force is actually the one that is on the international boundary. Now, Mr. Pathak, your successor, has said yesterday that 16 attempts were made to try and contact the Pakistanis over the telephone. They responded to the first, but the other 15 went without any response whatsoever. Mr. Pathak also says that 4 or 5 times India has attempted to hold flag meetings, but the Pakistanis have simply not been interested. How do you interpret that refusal to respond from the other side?
Mr. Thapar, it is my view that Pakistan's policy of proxy war and cross-border infiltration has been consistent over the last 15 years. Any intensification or any lull in ceasefire violations should not signal any change in this policy. And the message behind intensification of any hostilities is therefore not any different from what they have sent in the past. It is only a difference in our own perceptions. Sometimes we have been naive in imagining that fewer ceasefire violations would indicate any better relations. It is quite clear from the evidence that we have over the last few years that the larger Pakistani policy on the LOC or on the international boundary is governed by the Pak Army and the ISI and depends only on the efficacy of the Indian preventive and deterrent efforts.
Can I interrupt?
Yes, so certainly. I'll just make one more point, that it is also largely dependent on the domestic compulsions of Pakistan, and sometimes the changes that we see are the Pak Army's occasional recalibration of its own proxy war efforts?
The important thing about your answer is that you believe this is just the continuation of what Pakistan has been doing for years. There's nothing different. This is simply what their policy is. But you're also suggesting that you don't agree with the interpretation both from Mr. Satyabrat Pal as well as from General Jaswal, that in fact this is designed to try and internationalize Kashmir and to give Pakistan an excuse or a set of grounds for raising it at the UN. You don't particularly go with that interpretation. Have I understood that correctly?
No, partly only. What I would say is that the diplomatic niceties and the intricacies involved are something on which I would not be very competent to comment.
All right. In other words, you'll defer to other people on that. You won't disagree with them.
Absolutely.
Before I come back to Mr. Pal in Delhi and the studio here, General Masood, let me put this to you. I accepted your argument from your standpoint that it is incomprehensible that Pakistan at this moment of time, with its internal turmoil, would actually want to open a new flank and create fresh trouble by deliberately provoking violations on the ceasefire or on the international boundary line. But then, how do you account for the fact that 16 attempts have been made by phone to try and contact your side, and there's been no response? That the Border Security Force in India has asked for 5 or 6 flag meetings, and again there's been no response. If you really are innocent and it's incomprehensible that you would be involved, then why aren't you more readily responding to these attempts to hold flag meetings or to ring up and talk on the phone?
Well, if you ask them, it's just the opposite, I think. This is the whole problem. You see, it looks as though, every side thinks that they are very innocent. In fact, the problem is that we have seen and witnessed over the years, and it's historically also correct, that the LOC remains stable so long as both the countries want it to be stable from the political point of view, and the armies on both sides are with the political leadership. They become unstable and volatile when one side decides that it should be like that, and it becomes extremely violent when both sides decide that it should be volatile. So I think at the moment, to me, it seems very odd that Pakistan would like to have a volatile LOC when, as I explained earlier. So I mean, it's really amazing how both think that they are innocent. In fact, this is a political issue. One second I'll take. It's a political issue, and unless both sides are prepared to tackle it politically, I don't think this matter will ever be resolved.
Absolutely, that's very true. But you're also saying to me in that answer that the perception in Pakistan is that Pakistan has been attempting to contact the Indian side for flag meetings and for talks, and it's the Indians who've been refusing. In other words, both sides are accusing the other of ignoring attempts to sort out the matter. Is that your correct answer?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Mr. Pal, there's been an undoubted sharp spike in ceasefire violations since Mr. Modi took over. They've hit the headlines regularly in this country. I'm sure they've hit the headlines with a different interpretation equally regularly in Pakistan. But the interesting thing is that until the Foreign Secretary level talks were surprisingly and suddenly called off 8-9 days ago, the perception was that in fact the relationship was improving, that there was an opportunity for something new, perhaps even dramatic, to happen. So is the firing from the Pakistani side actually designed to scupper hopes of improvement?
Spikes like these in the past have been the Pakistani army's way of signaling that they're not very happy with an attempt to move forward on trying to improve bilateral relations. So it's entirely possible, and indeed the first spike was before the foreign secretaries were due to talk, and that would be entirely consistent with what's happened in the past.
And we know that the army has reservations about Mr. Nawaz Sharif's warm approach to India.
Absolutely. So therefore, this would be entirely part of the pattern. But if I could just respond very briefly to what General Masood said. I respect him very greatly. But it is also the case, what he described as the internal compulsions of Pakistan now, the turmoil it is in, is absolutely true. It is also the case that the Pakistan army is now engaged in a rather difficult campaign in North Waziristan for the first time, which has led to a massive displacement, internal displacement of Pathans.
And this is deflecting attention from that?
It does deflect attention partially.
Which is something the Pakistan army would want to do.
Absolutely.
I'll take that up with you in a moment's time, General Masood, but first I want to bring in General Jaswal and point this out. The two DG MOs spoke to each other on the phone yesterday. Today, the first flag meeting was actually held earlier this evening. Do you believe that this could begin to restore calm, or are you skeptical?
I would say that I'm slightly skeptical because DGMO, yes, it's a bomb, but the intention of Pakistan Army, if that ought to stay, then I think it would be a very, very temporary phase. It has to be, like was told, all this problem has to be sorted out diplomatically. Army-wise, yes, we will endeavor to keep so, but the intention which is coming from the Army headquarters or the ISI, if that continues to be the same, then I don't think it will sustain for long. I'm slightly skeptical about it.
Now, let me put this to you, Mr. Bansal. From your standpoint, and you were Director General of the BSF right up till December 2012, how tense would this be for the actual BSF soldiers on the border? After all, one has been killed through sniper firing, a couple more through encounters, and there are some 15,000 villagers that the Hindu says have been completely displaced from their homes and are seeking shelter elsewhere. How tense would the actual situation be at this moment for you and those villagers?
Undoubtedly, the position on the borders would be extremely tense and would call for the highest levels of vigilance and the highest levels of command and leadership on the part of the BSF deployed in those areas. However, it is again something which the BSF is quite used to and is quite capable of handling. It has done so in the past, and I do not think that the situation has, as I said earlier, changed very dramatically, except for the number of incidents having gone down or come up over the last couple of years.
Okay. General Masood, let me raise with you that point made by Mr. Satyabrat Pal here in the studio in Delhi. The one explanation could be the fact that your army is at the moment involved in a very bitter, bloody, intense battle against the Pakistani Taliban on your northwest border. Millions possibly of your own people have been displaced. There is enormous anguish that's been created. Is the army trying to deflect attention from that problem by attracting attention to a new issue on the other side?
I think to me it seems with all due respect that there is no understanding of the present situation in Pakistan. That has hardly any relevance. In fact, it's the other way around because in all as you know, that when there is a huge displacement of people, it's the army which plays a major role. Even, from the time of partition, everyone knows that the Pakistan army and also I think the Indian army played a very major role in the rehabilitation. So to say that they will try to sort of create a problem for themselves on the eastern border, I think it's so far-fetched. And I think there is some complete wrong perception in India about what is happening in Pakistan. I think we need to sort of really engage both at the political level and at the people's level to understand the situation here and not close our eyes to the reality of both the countries. And this is exactly what is happening. And as you rightly said, even the official channels of meeting of the foreign secretaries, which would have been very much a welcome sort of a development in the present circumstances, they have also again shut the door. What sort of logic is this, and what sort of international or political or diplomatic behavior
Absolutely.
is this?
General Masood, I completely accept your point that the two sides have a misperception of each other and they need to talk and begin to see each other perhaps through different lenses. But in the meantime, General Jaswal, our army is now under explicit instructions, as is the Border Security Force, to retaliate as forcefully as they are themselves fired upon. And many people believe that although these may not be new instructions, they've been stressed in an explicit way that hasn't happened before. Is there a danger that if these crossfire violations on the border and the LOC continue, the situation could just accidentally tip over into war? Is there any such danger? Because that's what worries a lot of people as they read the papers every day.
That's me? Are you asking?
Yes, absolutely.
Sorry,
it is you, General Jaswal.
Yeah.
Apologies if it's a bad line. Yeah. Is there a danger this situation could accidentally tip over into war?
No. I don't think. I think both countries are mature enough. These are escalations which keep going up and down. It is not a situation where we can go to war. Yes, our responses will probably keep increasing and become more and more prohibitive.
But forgive me, if the responses, General Saab, let me interrupt. If the responses on both sides keep increasing, then isn't it a danger you could tip over into war?
No, I don't think so as of now. There are certain other factors which are involved, the diplomatic levels and the pressures, international pressures, etc., whatever is there. To go to war, there's a lot of space between cross-border violations and going to war.
All right.
That space, it's very big. Very big.
I hope
you cannot go to war till the time the territories are not crossed.
All right.
If the territories get crossed,
I hope
then,
you are absolutely right. You talk about a lot of space in terms of diplomatic maneuverings. Diplomatic talks have actually ended, so some of that space has shrunk, but I hope you're right. Let me put this to you. The recent turmoil in Pakistan has clearly left Nawaz Sharif weaker. It's left the Pakistani army considerably stronger. General Raheel Sharif may be a Nawaz Sharif appointee, but no longer does he feel any great sense of loyalty to the man who appointed him. Now, side by side, the Americans are going to be departing Afghanistan in sizable numbers starting this December. Is there a danger that we'll see much more infiltration, much more intrusion, and as a result, much more crossfire violation over the border, over the LOC? In other words, will the situation get a lot worse before it starts to get better?
No, I think it will probably be that we will get a certain breathing space for the next couple of years. Because once the Americans leave, the entire focus will turn to bringing Afghanistan back firmly within Pakistan's sphere of influence.
So we'll get a breathing space rather than heightened tension.
That would be my perception, because the tension would then turn in
most Indian analysts think the opposite.
I think from 2014, from the end of 2014 till 2016, Pakistan will bend all its energies to getting its proxies into Kabul. Once that is done.
But then doesn't this contradict the earlier theory you had that the Pakistan army is deflecting attention from the TTP fight it's waging on its northwest border?
No.
If that leads them to do this, surely what happens in Afghanistan could lead them to do more.
No. What will happen in Afghanistan is that its proxies would all go in there. Even in the present campaign in North Waziristan, from the ISPR's own press releases, the one group that hasn't been touched is the Haqqani network.
So in other words, what you're saying, and I'm going to end with this, is in total contrast, in fact in contradiction to all other Indian analysts, you're saying that the American withdrawal from Afghanistan could give us respite rather than increase tension and increase intrusion and infiltration.
For 2 years, I would imagine that all attention would turn to getting Afghanistan back under control.
I hope you're right. I'll simply point out for the audience that you may end up being a lone voice. Most other Indian analysts actually believe the situation will deteriorate and deteriorate markedly with the American withdrawal.
2 years after the Americans leave.
2 years after. So 2 years of respite, and then the problems could perhaps escalate.
That's my assessment.
All right. My thanks to you for coming to the studio. My thanks also to General Jaswal, General Masood for joining me. And if you have been tested, thank you for watching this particular part.